The tragic events of this week, Charlie Kirk's assassination, have caused a lot of reflection online and throughout actually most of Christendom. The entire nation was shocked to find out that Charlie Kirk was gunned down on campus as he was trying to exchange ideas with others, as was his pattern. What do we make of this? What do we do with this now? What are we to do as Christians? How are we to take not merely the taking of Charlie Kirk's life, but the after effects that we see happening on both sides of the political aisle? How do we understand those, and how do we make sense of them in light of the gospel passages? Well, hi everyone, I'm Lenny Esposito, and in this Come Let Us Reason podcast, I want to address all of my thoughts. I've been thinking deeply about this, as well as the events of capturing Kirk's assassin, and how we can put it all together into understanding what this means from a Christian perspective. I hope you'll join me. There's some really important items I want to talk about here, and we'll be talking about it all again on this Come Let Us Reason Together. The events of this past week have shaken our nation. Charlie Kirk was known for his on-campus debates, championing both conservative political concepts as well as his Christian faith. He was gunned down last week while simply asking people to discuss the issues with him. Now, Kirk was a young father and had so much of his life ahead of him until a bullet shot in hatred ripped him away from his wife and children. That's true evil. And now that the assassin has been apprehended, well, I'm not happy. I'm relieved, to be sure, but I'm not happy. That's because the killer, 22-year-old Tyler Robinson, was basically turned in by his father. Now, that was the right thing to do, but here's another family that will be in anguish over the poisonous fruits of allowing sin to have its way. And that's really where my concern lies. As a Christian, I've been thinking a lot about the last week. And I know that on the whole, there are many hot takes on the act and its aftermath, but the only way I can make true sense of it all is by filtering it through my Christianity. And I think that's how it should be for every follower of Jesus. I really think that it's how it should be for all those who uphold the values of Western society, because Western society only forms from a Christian assumption about how the world works. So I want to take some time here and delve into all of this. I think it's important to begin to clarify just what brought us to this point, to understand what is happening now, and humbly offer some suggestions on how we can move forward in the best way possible. Because our reaction to Kirk's slaying may prove to be vital to the survival of our culture. Now, there are certain events in the course of history that can be pivotal for a nation. The shot at Lexington or Fort Sumter, for example. Pearl Harbor, September 11th, 2001, signaling a point which America's assumed invulnerability crumbled along with the Twin Towers. But not all pivotal events of history are happening on such a large scale. Certainly the capture of Los Angeles police beating of Rodney King that was caught on video had reverberated through the last 3 decades. George Floyd and the BLM movements are simply downstream from that. And now we have the assassination of Charlie Kirk. This may well prove to be another pivotal moment, for it lays bare the pestilence that has been seething beneath the skin of our culture. The symptoms of our malady, well, they were always noticeable. The continued divisions, not simply of policies and ideas, as those have always been true, but of our understanding of who each of us is and how we fit into this grand experiment of a united people. First, it is clear that people today see themselves not as one nation formed from the joining of individuals, but as individuals who happen to inhabit a nation. We no longer gather socially. We separate so we can post on social media. We would rather react than reason. We would rather be outraged than reach out. Such actions are not new in the human condition. In fact, I think they're the de facto position. Societies from the beginning of history have always held an us-them dichotomy. The loss of it was only at the rise of Christianity, as scholars such as Larry Seidentop, Tom Holland, Rodney Stark, and Charles Taylor have so well documented. Christianity changed the script. It is Christianity and Christianity alone that gifted the world with not just the idea that all human beings are equally valuable, but that one should defer one's own desires and seek the benefit of others. But now, we live in a post-Christian society. We've lost the only stabilizing force powerful enough to keep civilization truly civil. As C.S. Lewis said, quote, "We make men without chests and expect of them virtue and enterprise. We laugh at honor and are shocked to find traitors in our midst. We castrate and bid the geldings to be fruitful." End quote. It seems we're like Nietzsche's madman. We don't realize the effect of killing God that has on our interactions. But Kirk slaying, well, that's a clear sign of just how much this infection is mutating our souls. You see, there's been a rise in political violence in our society, and I think that's unarguable. School shootings, church burnings, riots in the streets, these have all risen in dramatic proportions. The number of domestic terrorist attacks and plots against government targets, motivated by partisan political beliefs in the past 5 years, is nearly triple the number of such incidents in the previous 25 years combined. Now, blaming weapons manufacturers for such violence to me is akin to blaming the corner bakery's display case for your weight problem. It simply doesn't follow. No, violence, especially political violence, doesn't escalate this quickly in a vacuum. Because we have abandoned community and adopted a radicalized understanding of individual autonomy, well, we've begun to see ourselves and our feelings as the most important thing. Colleges are filled with safe spaces to shelter from triggering speech. One may be questioned, detained, and even arrested in the UK or Canada for words that make others feel uncomfortable. Charlie Kirk held open-air debates, allowing opposing views to speak, and for that, he was labeled a Nazi. As people become drastically individualized, their moral values also become individualized and decouple from any grounding higher than themselves. They begin to hold a very high view of their own position, and their moral assuredness grows. They therefore adopt not simply a language of division, but a viewpoint of moral superiority. Now, to this point, we have seen two things true in our culture. First, because we've removed Christianity as the framework through which we interpret society, well, we've become a morally relativistic society, with nothing to ground what is right and what is wrong, outside of our own opinions. Yet human beings are creatures that crave some kind of moral order. Beyond the fact that no culture could ever continue to exist under true anarchy, well, human beings are simply wired for moral order. We need to know how to classify acts as good and evil. But secondly, because we have splintered and fractured, we've tried to make politics the bastion for our creating of those identities. The result is that in the 21st century, we're much more willing to weaponize political stances. And this shows in our political rhetoric. Now, again, there's always been name-calling and caricaturing in politics, even at the beginning of the nation. In fact, in their contentious battle for the presidency in 1800, the campaign teams for Thomas Jefferson and John Adams got really nasty, accusing one of being a half-breed and the other of being a hermaphrodite. Yet these two famously continued their correspondence and their friendships until their deaths. Now, that kind of camaraderie are deeply conspicuous by their absence today. No, the attempt to ground morality in politics becomes a fatal flaw, I think, and it has clearly affected all parts of the political spectrum. But it would be a mistake to believe that it affects all factions equally. This is because not all factions have their roots in the same ideals. This is why it becomes crucial to recognize the difference between the philosophies of our political divisions and the way they approach their desired outcomes. For example, In politics, we seem to simplify groups into, say, the right and the left, the conservatives and the liberals. Now, I understand why the media and the political parties do so, because it becomes easier to talk on broad oversimplifications. It allows them to tar everyone who holds a different opinion with the same brush, right? It becomes expedient. The constant cries, for example, of fascist, Nazi, ultra-right, and Christian nationalists has undoubtedly contributed to the climate where anyone like Tyler Robinson, who took those charges seriously, would then follow with convictions of action. He would put feet to them, so to speak. I mean, would you feel justified if you could go back in time and kill Hitler while he was still a teen? But this dichotomy causes a problem. This friend-enemy distinction, well, that's one of the first signs of the secular cancer eating away at the soul of our nation. Now, that theory, originally spelled out by Carl Schmitt, holds that everyone views others as either allies or adversaries based on their groups. Now, these aren't simply political stances. These are deeper. These are more fundamental. Schmitt believed that they posed an existential threat to your particular group. Now, certainly given the rhetoric espoused by the wokeists and the leftists that support them, the friend-enemy distinction has been running rampant throughout our culture. Ironically, Schmitt used his concept to further the Nazi program in the 1930s. And I think that's a sad irony that his thoughts would be adopted by those who use them so vociferously to shout Nazi and fascist at others. Well, of course, Schmitt understood where this line of thinking would lead. Matter of fact, he wrote in his book, The Concept of the Political, that, quote, the friend, enemy, and combat concepts receive their real meaning precisely because they refer to the real possibility of physical killing, end quote. Scary, isn't it? Now we see just how right he was. No, this is why the friend-enemy distinction should be rejected by Christians. This is completely antithetical to what Jesus taught. One cannot turn the other cheek, walk 2 miles instead of one, or pray for one's enemies if you consider those a threat to you as an ally. It's precisely that our identities don't reside in ourselves, but in our status as new creations in Christ that make the difference. For nothing in this world can remove us from the Father's hand, as Jesus promised in John 10:29. In fact, Paul reemphasizes this fact in Romans 8:38 and 39 when he wrote, quote, for I am sure that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor rulers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus our Lord. You see, political positions pose no existential threat because when one lives for Christ, even death is gain. But even though various political tribes exist, each with its own ideas on how to affect change, I think it would be naive to believe that all are morally equal. I think recent events have shown us the whataboutism that many progressives have offered as kind of a scapegoat in response to Kirk's killing is clearly disingenuous, especially when contrasted with the idea of conservatism. For conservatism, by its nature, revolves around conserving certain aspects of our culture. It champions things like the traditional family structure, existing societal structures, respect for authority, the value of the free exchange of ideas, and the understanding accumulated through centuries of human experience and growth. While Charlie Kirk held to the ideals of free enterprise, individual liberty, small government, freedom of expression, constitutional rights, and he said he was a conservative because, quote, people should be free to succeed and fail, keep their own stuff, make their own choices, without government in the way, end quote. Now, Kirk modeled his conservatism by his approach of going to universities and seeking to inform people and perhaps change their minds through rational discourse, the free exchange of ideas. This is the traditional understanding of what should take place at a university. Keeping tradition, values, family, and community, well, these are all hallmarks of the classical conservatism, and they're represented much more highly in conservative circles. Progressivism, on the other hand, has at its core an idea that humanity needs to progress. It should not stay where it is. In fact, conserving societal structures, well, that's part of the problem for many progressives. The fact that individuals who are the most influential in birthing, spreading, and championing the ideas of progressivism believe that it is the continued reliance on the old models that is the thing that hinders humans reaching new levels of flourishing. I mean, think about it. From its beginnings with Karl Marx, Lenin and the Frankfurt School, through Derrida, Foucault, and Gramsci, to Che Guevara and Saul Alinsky, disruption is the way progress is made. Progressivism will therefore incorporate revolution, violence, and anarchy. These are important tools in their models for progressing. Now, we see this increasingly throughout the different facets of the modern progressivism. In the recent BLM movements, for example, the calls for equity, the drive to dismantle the patriarchy, the need to overthrow structures of systemic oppression, the breaking down of hegemony, and on and on. Old structures are assumed to be incurably corrupt and therefore cannot be reformed but must be replaced. The way replacement happens? Well, through revolution of some type. Yeah, the fruit of the progressive disruption, well, that's on display everywhere as well, whether it be pro-Palestinian protesters blocking a freeway, climate activists defacing artwork, rioters looting a Walmart, or the Democratic legislature and governor of California usurping the natural rights of parents so that they may advance their transgender fetishes on children. On campus, progressive college students not only shout down opinions with which they disagree, they seek to remove the speaker from being heard by anyone, ever. Now, is it so far a stretch then to think that a faction learning this lesson would extend it to doing so by a bullet instead of by shouting? You see, violence exists across the political spectrum, but it is not a 50-50 problem. Violence in the service to progressive ideals is a feature, while violence in the service to conservative activism should be considered a bug. If you doubt this summation, then just looking at a barometer happening in real time should cure you of it. See the macabre glee so many on the left have not only claimed but felt necessary to trumpet across their various social media channels. They cheer because a man who never held a political office was slain and would no longer be able to speak. They celebrate the death of a young human being working within the system to change minds through intellect and debate. Even in one of the surveillance videos showing the assassination, one may see a young man dancing as Kirk was laying on the floor fighting for his life. This is not the way. What is the Christian model? Well, as I said above, grouping people into only right and left is oversimplistic. It can also be a calculated step meant to intentionally mislead. I think, in thinking of a better way to address the issue, we must begin with the question of which model best characterizes what we should aspire. What embodies the best ideals and promotes the greatest human flourishing? I think the question is an easy one. If Christianity is the basis for Western society, then all the other major political philosophies offered today may be traced back to it. And every one of them has their roots, one way or another, in Christianity. But not all of them follow those Christian principles. Many bastardize the fundamentals so as to serve the desires of whomever is championing that latest cause. Yeah, there's no escaping the impact of the teachings of Jesus and his followers have had on Western civilization. Marxism, for example, could never have developed from an Eastern or an Islamic base. It's a heresy of Christianity, but it can only grow in Christian soil. So when I survey the landscape and look at the divergent political positions out there, I, as a follower of Jesus, am called not to be a conservative per se, although I believe many of the principles that Kirk voiced above are true and good for society. I'm called to be a Christian. Now let me emphasize that again. My goal isn't to be aligned with a particular political faction. It is to be aligned with the teachings and principles of Christianity that Jesus modeled and that his apostles taught. Now, does that mean I don't align myself with a conservative candidate? Well, no. This is partly because Christianity teaches virtues that stand in direct opposition to the idea of revolution. It shuns the concept of slaying of a young father or gloating over celebrating death because it advances one's tribe. But by that same token, because progressivism, Marxism, wokeism, and so much of the leftist ideology sits as both a heresy of Christianity and antithetical to its teachings, I can quickly and vigorously reject their adherents as more dangerous. Well, does this mean that I must only support or vote for Christian candidates who align with all my views? Well, no, such an objection is silly on its face. I mean, it doesn't follow that if we have two choices running for political office, that the one who does not hold all my Christians' positions is the one I should abstain for voting for. Or if a candidate has a fair chance of winning, I shouldn't vote for him. The political structure we currently inhabit forces a dichotomous choice upon us. So it's incumbent upon me morally to choose the one who will be closer to my ideal. Now, we all know the famous trolley problem where one is faced with a situation where there is no good choice. That thought experiment shows that the moral thing to do is to choose what will be less damaging and more advantageous. We should, in our political decisions, try to obtain the greatest good available, given the real-world circumstances and the likely outcome. So, where do we go from here? Well, here are some specific points that I want to offer in the wake of Charlie Kirk's murder. Number one, understand our primary identity in Christ. I think this is paramount. I think since we are living in a post-Christian world, it should be no surprise that neither party has a record of righteousness. Now, I don't identify as a person belonging to a political party, but as a believer to Jesus. That's who I belong to. Far too many people today have allowed their politics to inform their Christianity instead of making their Christianity inform their politics. Secondly, understand the limitations of our political system. Though we are Christians, we must still live in this world, and our participation here is important. Churchill famously said, "Democracy is the worst form of government, except for all the others that have been tried." And I think he's right. The United States was formed on an idea of liberty, of a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. It is, of course, because we live in a fallen world with sinful people who love power, that we will be forced to work within this system and make the most of it. But in Romans 13, Paul clearly teaches that the government is an instrument of God to correct. Now, if we understand that this government is ultimately accountable to us, the people, then not being informed and engaged in steering our nation towards a more righteous direction is actually an abdication of our calling by God. Number three, stand up for righteousness. Charlie Kirk's legacy was that he went to college campuses and used dialogue to try and change minds. Now that's a laudable goal, and it becomes important for all Christians to in some way be prepared to stand up for truths. Jesus put the responsibility upon us to be salt and light. It is all believers' call. I recently had a conversation with a woman who had asked whether all Christians were called to defend the truth. My response was that yes, we were, but not all in the same way. I then compared it to evangelizing. So all Christians are commanded to evangelize, but not all Christians are called to be evangelists. Now that's a unique calling and a unique gifting. Similarly, all Christians are not called to be political activists, but all Christians are called to stand for truth. There is righteousness in rejecting progressivism and in the harms it causes. You can confront your child's teacher if she's spreading woke ideology. You can decry the evil of promoting celebrations in response to the slayings of Kirk. If we don't do this, we will allow sin to run unchecked, which will lead to even greater evils. Heck, Stephen in Acts chapter 6 and 7 stood boldly before the Sanhedrin and declared how wrong they were. Jesus himself turned over the tables in the temple, and he called out the Jewish leaders as whitewashed tombs and hypocrites. No, identifying immorality is part of the Christian life. Number 4, modeling ourselves after Jesus. Being prepared to suffer is the first subset of this idea. One of the messages we hear far too little, in fact, and is the call for suffering that the Christian message brings. Suffering is an unavoidable part of the victorious Christian life. Jesus talked about it throughout the Gospels. When speaking to his disciples before his death, Jesus warned them, quote, "If the world hates you, know that it hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love you as its own. But because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you. Remember the word that I said to you, a servant is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will also persecute you. If they kept my word, they will also keep yours." You see, for the Christian, suffering is simply a fact of life. Now, I mourn the death of Charlie Kirk, but I also notice how much more powerful his message has become because he was giving it as he died. In fact, the early Christians found this to be true so much that Tertullian told the Roman Empire, the emperor who was persecuting them, he said, quote, "The more you mow us down, the more numerous we grow. The blood of the Christians is seed." And that is true as well. I think we also need to resist the impulse to demonize everyone. Now, I get it. The pro-trans activists want to hurt our children. The pro-Hamas people are complicit in keeping the remaining hostages in captivity. There are many examples where a small faction of the hard-left progressives are being sustained by a much larger group of others because they happen not to be on the right. It's tempting to simply group everyone on the left of you as like wicked and want to punish them. But punishment shouldn't be the motive driving us. Righteousness should. Now, you may say at this point, well, wait a minute, Lenny, didn't you just say you should stand up for righteousness? Well, yeah, I did. But these two things are not mutually exclusive. Let's, for example, take the question of reporting those who posted celebratory videos of Charlie Kirk's death on social media. Now, I think such actions are part of the acid eating away at our social fabric. It is robbing Kirk of his humanity and the value that life holds to be celebrating his death. Now, in past eras, bad actions would be mitigated by the fact that people were more community-minded. Everyone belonged to certain social groups, and those groups would act as a kind of a restraint and a corrective to the individual. Today, because we are so hyper-individuated, those institutions no longer function in that way. So we are again forced to use flawed means to try and remove that acid from our cultural body before it does more damage. And just as the fame of the first schooling shooters led to further shootings, these celebrations will certainly lead to further violence. But that doesn't mean that I want to get everybody who ever posted a critique or a bad video of Kirk and call him to the carpet. Again, there's a difference between wanting revenge and wanting to remove a cancer. Look, here's a biblical example. There was no greater act of political evil than the Sanhedrin capturing and executing Jesus because they were worried about keeping their power. Here was the perfect man, sinless, who was executed for political expediency. I mean, if anyone had the right to respond with violence, it was Jesus and his followers. However, we read the opposite happened. When Malchus, the servant of the high priest, went to take Jesus by force, one of Jesus' disciples drew his sword and sliced off his ear. What did Jesus do? He said, "No more of this." And Jesus healed Malchus's ear. No, don't demonize absolutely everyone who aligns with the progressives. There are so many people who simply have been fed false ideas and they drank the Kool-Aid. They believed the lies. Some have never been exposed themselves to alternative explanations. I've many times gone on college campuses and done open air forums or taken young people on campus talks to, say, UC Berkeley to talk one-on-one with students there. And we've gotten into some very good conversations. They've heard things that they've never heard before. But that chance goes away as soon as you begin grouping people into an us-them situation. Again, that friend-enemy distinction, that's unchristian. And while we can naturally fall into it, we must resist doing so. Jesus healed Malchus's ear. Whose hearts could God heal if we give him the chance? Lastly, we should seek civilization rather than catharsis. We should resist the gotchas because it will ultimately undermine the very civilization we're trying to preserve. Let me quote from James Lindsay, whose prescient article on this makes the point well. He writes that we have a choice, catharsis or civilization. In fact, he says, there's no other choice for us. We can have a civilization where people are civilized enough to live, work, and trade with one another in a productive way, a safe way, a trustworthy enough way. Or we can abandon it for the pursuit of letting the negative emotions of the past years, decade, or decades consume us. But there is no other choice. If we choose catharsis, we let our emotions, our pathos, get the better of us. If we turn to our anger and look to give it more justifications, we turn to our frustration and seek an orgiastic release through whatever deeds vents it. We turn to our oppression, our rage, our despair, our fear, and we let it flow through us until the pathos pours out and covers the land in what will eventually be fire and blood. Yeah, catharsis is tempting, and stepping into it will be libidinous, orgiastic, elevating, and divine until we realize that it's the feast of demons upon everything we could have built and everything we could have passed on to our children and our posterity. Lindsay writes civilization is harder. It's bitter, in fact, in comparison to catharsis. It means swallowing hard and taking all those negative emotions and sublimating them into something productive, something that builds rather than makes us feel better. Civilization feels like injustice, in fact, even though it is the only basis for justice outside of heaven and hell. Well, folks, these are all my comments. I tell you, I will pray for Charlie's family. I pray for Tyler and his family. And I pray for our nation. And I pray that I can be someone who walks as Jesus would in trying times such as these. How about you? Do you agree or disagree? Is there something I missed? What other thoughts do you have? Let me know down in the comments section, and I pray that you and your family will stay safe and be blessed in the coming days. We aren't at the end of this. We're just at the beginning. We therefore have an opportunity to use this point upon which history turns, to point others to Jesus. And that would be the true victory. God bless you all. Thank you for watching this Come Reason video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to see more videos like these, consider subscribing to our Come Reason YouTube channel by clicking on the subscribe button. And you can follow us on social media. Lastly, if you'd like to help keep these kinds of videos free, consider providing a donation by clicking on the donation button beside me. Thank you.